All right, well, I want to welcome everybody to our Leave the Leaves webinar. My name is Mindy Murdoch. I'm our Director for Recreation Services here in Zionsville Parks and Recreation. If you've tuned in before, I've offered a number of different webinars, mostly on gardening topics, native plant topics, things of that sort. So it doesn't bang against the table that I'm sitting at. But this is just another one that I wanted to present as we're moving into fall, and leaf cleanup and fall garden cleanup is going to get started here. Just wanted to make sure that people really consider before you start cleaning up, maybe some potential of leaving some things to be throughout winter. And I'll also touch base at the end of this presentation with regards to spring cleanup also, just kind of a new different way to think of that. So again, if you're watching this live, feel free to drop in questions and we'll get those towards the end. But if you watch this in another format, you can always reach out to the Zionsville Parks and ask us questions. I am a naturalist by trade, but gardening by hobby and just kind of a passion that I have personally. So most of this I've gained either through my career or just myself learning as I go. All right. So, it's that time of year. The air is turning crisp. The leaves are starting to change color and will soon be falling. And that's usually when a lot of people start their whole idea of fall cleanup. And that can come in many features, but most of us, it usually means the disposal of leaves that might fall on the ground. So traditionally, if you think about leaf removal, and you see this all over in every neighborhood, there's like 3 steps that we take, right? We rake the leaves, or if we don't feel like raking, we blast them with blowers into large piles. Sometimes we put them on the curb, sometimes we just put them in various areas. Most of those piles end up in bags, either trash bags or brown landscape bags. And then we place those bags out to be hauled off to a landfill from our normal trash company, whoever you might be using, whether in central Indiana or really anywhere. If you're lucky enough, like portions here in Zionsville, you might have where the Department of Public Works comes by with their leaf vac and actually sucks those leaves up for you. So you're not bagging them, but they're still going away. They're leaving your yard. But really more and more research is showing that these actions of picking up all these leaves and moving them away from our property is actually harming the environment, and it's robbing your property, your garden of nutrients that those plants and animals could utilize. Why do we stick to this outdated garden practice? Well, it's just habit. A lot of people, this is all that we know, it's all we've ever done. Society pressures, especially if you live in places like HOAs, that, this is what this is what you do. You make sure your leaves are gone and your yard is pristine with not a leaf in sight. And, just some of it's just outdated garden practices. If you look at the various different books or even online resources, a lot of them, it's that tidying and getting everything. But we just can't seem to rid ourselves of this idea that we need to tidy everything up before winter hits. So we're raking, we're mowing, we're blowing away a little bit of nature that's actually very important that we should consider leaving within our ecosystem that is our yard. So we're going to kind of go over all of these for the most part, maybe not to save time one, but 5 reasons to really leave your leaves. One is those leaves are providing habitat for wildlife, and we're going to talk a lot about the habitats and who utilizes those leaves. They're providing nutrients for a lot of different organisms, things that you're not thinking about, but within your soil, there's a lot of organisms that live there year round, even in the winter months, that rely on that that nutrients that come from fallen leaves. So you're actually enriching your soil, not just because you're putting nutrients back into your soil, but you're making sure that you have a nice biota of different, from earthworms to microscopic bacteria to many different insects, springtails, things that would be normally in your soil that rely on these leaves. Of course, we're going to talk about this one too. We're reducing our waste because we're not sending those things to landfill, and we're reducing the amount of pollution because hopefully we're not utilizing some of the more wasteful methods of picking up. And then of course, if you're going to leave your leaves, you're not bagging them up, you're saving yourself some time to get out, to really enjoy the fall weather, to spend it with your family, to walk on a trail, to check out your neighborhood, and again, saving some time instead of just worrying about leaf cleanup. So we talk about the benefits to wildlife. So, while we strive to have the tidiest garden and yard there is, really, that might look good to us, but it's not going to be a benefit to the animals that live around and in your yard, anywhere from large, if you're thinking birds, all the way down to the smallest insects. So in this picture, we've got a little woolly bear there that's heading into those leaves. So one thing that kind of interests me is that we talked a lot about native gardening and gardening for pollinators and promoting plants that bring in birds into your yard and pollinators like butterflies and bees into your yard during the summer months and spring months. But then we forget, right, that when we get into the fall and winter months, those animals that we worked so hard to bring in, they're still there. They're just out of sight. So then we forget about them. But that's really when they need us just as much as, not just for a food source in the summer, but a place to make sure that they make it through winter so that you have them the next year. So just kind of visualize, native animals. If you went and took a walk in a park or a state park or a wildlife area, kind of look at what is there. Nature is not manicured. There's sticks, there's leaves, it's not cleaned up. There's tall grasses, there's seed heads left over from plants that are providing food for birds. So it's really, nature in fall does not tidy itself up. It actually gets pretty messy. And the animals that live in those natural habitats have evolved to take a benefit to that. And so when we try to bring natural habitats back into your yards, as we should, we need to also remember that we also need to bring in the fall and winter habitats that those animals need just as much as the summer habitats. So, there is life in that leaf layer. If you go into a woods and you remove fall leaves and you take a peek at what's going in there, there's their own ecosystem within that leaf layer. And I love this graphic from Healthy Yards. Kind of shows everything that might be in those leaves as you turn them over. There's things from spiders and snails and worms, insects and fireflies, wood lice, all the way to the things that would eat them. So your salamanders, your frogs, your chipmunks. Those leaves are important for things like turtles, a lot of like our box turtles, or in the case of our bumblebees, we have a big connection to trying to protect our bees because their populations are dropping. And actually, rusty patched bumblebee is now endangered. And there are others that they may be listed here soon. But thinking about a bumblebee, the only one that survives through winter is the queens, the new queens. And she'll normally only burrow an inch or two. She's a little insect. She can't go inches and feet down, but just an inch or two below the soil to hibernate. So having those leaves actually lay on top of her provides kind of a thick protective layer and make sure that she doesn't freeze solid throughout winter, so that we can have, again, in the spring, have new bumblebees emerging and continuing that life cycle. And then while, the big push right now is on the monarch butterfly and how do we attract butterflies, love seeing the push to plant milkweed. They're very well known, but they migrate, they leave, and they have their own issues with their migration. But that's not the norm when it comes to most of our butterflies and our moths. Most of them will actually overwinter within our landscapes that we create. Whether they're as an egg, they might overwinter, like the woolly bear as a caterpillar. They might overwinter as a chrysalis or cocoon, kind of mixed into those dead leaves and those branches. Or they need to find a place to actually stay as an adult, so that they, as soon as spring emerges, they can begin their life cycle and to lay their eggs. So just a little bit more about those Lepidoptera. So 94% of our moth species actually rely on that leaf layer to complete their life cycle. And that's, again, that could be as cocoons like the Polyphemus. That could be as eggs, that could be as an adult. So a couple of them, so the great spangled fritillary and the woolly bear caterpillar. The fritillary does it as an adult. The woolly bear is as a caterpillar itself, but they use that leaf layer as protection. Redbed and hair streaks will actually lay their eggs on those oak leaves. So when the oak leaves fall on the ground, those dead leaves are the first food source for that caterpillar when it emerges in the spring. And then, of course, we know our lunas, swallowtail butterflies are another one that their cocoons and their chrysalises are meant to look like dried leaves because, again, they want to blend in with those falling leaves so that in the spring they can emerge and you can enjoy them in your yard. So again, I like this. This one was from Pollinator Friendly Yards on Facebook, but it's just, what do you send away when you send away your leaves? Not just the nutrients, but a lot of life that you would normally have. And maybe you've tried to have in your yard and now you're sending them off. So the other one, I hear a lot of times when talk about leaving leaves, immediately people say, well, it will kill my grass. So I can't leave any of my leaves because all of my grass will die. And, it is like, it's true. But I think we take way too much into effect when it comes to our lawns. Lawns are, in the United States, they are our single largest crop. It is a crop we cannot eat, but we spend millions and millions and billions almost of dollars maintaining a crop that, other than mowing constantly or playing on. I mean, I love my lawn too, but do we need as much? It's nothing that we can really utilize. So there's about 40 million acres of lawn in the United States right now. And yes, if we wanted to mimic something natural, we're going to need that leaf layer. We're going to need at least a couple inches. And that would kill your lawn. Although I will say, leaving some leaves on your lawn, similar to this picture, is actually a benefit to your grass. It's going to allow some of that nutrients to filter back in. It's not going to be thick enough that it's going to kill off the grass. So it is a benefit to it. But, you probably do want to move those leaves off the areas that you have lawn, but maybe consider starting some new flower beds and having a little less lawn next year. But if you're going to move those leaves, there's a few things that you can opt for. One is trying to use either like a vacuum where you're vacuum up a whole leaf, or rake, the good old-fashioned rake, so that you're moving full-size leaves from one place to another. And the other one is to try to minimize your use of lawnmowers. Again, if you've got acres and acres of lawn, maybe it's time to get a little less lawn. And definitely leaf blowers, because both lawnmowers and leaf blowers, being single cycle engine, they release a lot of pollution into the air. Leaf blowers, as they're blowing that debris around, it's actually been shown to help cause their carcinogens that they bring in, so that impacts human health. as well as being loud. So if you're not wearing proper ear protection, there's some concerns there also. And then just that noise pollution that comes with those materials. We want to enjoy our fall, and it's hard to enjoy fall when all you hear are the lawnmowers and the leaf blowers throughout your neighborhood. The other one, we're talking about our lawns here, and now we're kind of going more into our gardens, is that another reason we don't want the leaves to leave our property is that they're a free resource for you. If you're into purchasing mulch every year, if you're into buying lots of different artificial or maybe organic fertilizers, leaves do that for you, and they're right there. They're free. They're from the trees. I'm sure if you don't have enough leaves, your neighbors would be more than happy to give you their leaves. They're ones that no one's going to barter with you and say, no, I want some money for my leaves. So, but there's two benefits when those leaves fall. One is that they form that natural mulch to break down, and they actually have the same weed suppression and moisture retention as shredded wood mulch. So if every year you're buying yards of shredded wood mulch, look at your leaves as a potential. But the other thing is that leaves fully break down and they fertilize the soil, and they break down faster than that wood mulch. So you might, need to apply every year, which is good because the leaves fall every year, but they're going to put nutrients straight back into your soil. If you think about how a leaf is formed, the trees take those nutrients and those minerals from deep into the soil up into their leaves to create food for themselves. But at the end of the season, they can't absorb the leaves back. They absorb back their chlorophyll, so those leaves fall. And so those nutrients that were deep in the soil now are at the top of the soil, and they're just waiting for you to use them instead of you taking them away. If you want to use your leaves in your garden beds, they're great. Again, suppressing the weeds, helping keep the soil moist, breaking down for nutrients. And they're also really good if you've got freshly planted, since fall's a good time to get out there and do some new plantings. If you got some new plantings or some very tender perennials, that you can place a pretty nice thick layer of leaves around those plants that act like an insulation. And that whole idea of if you put the leaves on your garden beds, it's going to smother your plants, it's not really true. You can use it the same as you would mulch. You're not going to put mulch right on top of your plant. You're going to put it around it for protection. But those leaves are going to help hold that in and then provide nutrients to your plant as they break. So why, again, don't we want to put leaves somewhere other than our yard? Well, the other big one is, they're not litter. They really do not belong in our landfills at all. Hopefully they might end up at a recycling facility and are turned into mulch. It's not helping the wildlife that might be in those, but at least it's not eating up your landfill. But a lot of it doesn't. All of those that end up in bags and are picked up by normal trash carriers, they end up in landfills, or they might be burned. And again, they're not providing anything to our environment on that end. So according to the USPA, 13% of our solid waste, so that's 33 million tons a year, are yard debris. So that's leaves, that's plants, that's sticks, things that could naturally be composted and broken down are ending up in landfills or being burned. The way current landfills are made, they really don't allow for natural decomposition. There's not enough oxygen. They're placed in as layers. So truly, if that organic matter does break down, it's being broken down as methane. That methane can be captured and used as fuel, and it is in some areas. But again, it's something very natural that we don't need to put into our landfills when landfill room is so limited as it is. And no one wants a new landfill near them. So And our landfills account for the largest source of our man-made methane. And we do know that methane is a greenhouse gas. It causes a lot of issues with our atmosphere and with our ozone layers. So I'm going to throw this one in because a lot of people save their leaves, which is great, but they end up shredding their leaves. So it's kind of one of those, it's good, but it could be better. So granted, those leaves are staying on your property. That's fantastic. You're going to use them for compost. It's much more environmentally friendly than just bagging your leaves and sending them off to the landfill. But just keep in mind a few things with your shredded leaves. For one, they don't provide as much cover to your planting bed. So if you're going to use them as mulch, those shredded leaves aren't going to really cover things the same as a whole leaf would. They will actually break down faster. So if you're trying to use them as mulch, by the midsummer, your leaves are going to be gone. And if you this is the one case that if you put them on way too thick, you could actually do some smothering for your plants, just because they are shredded and they kind of compact up really well. The other thing is when you're shredding those leaves, you're also potentially destroying a lot of the wildlife that are in those leaves. So especially if we're talking about caterpillars or chrysalis or cocoons, even the insect eggs, there's a good chance that they're not making it through that trauma. So, where you can in your garden beds, leave those leaves whole. They do provide more benefits as whole versus shredded. And if you have the space and you're thinking, well, I want my leaves to be composted, start a leaf pile and allow those leaves to start to break down on their own. And then you can gradually over the year add some of the leaves back into your compost pile as dry material versus trying to shred it all at once. Again, you need to have the space, and I realize not everyone has a lot of space, but not everyone has a lot of leaves. It just depends on what your yard looks like. But having that pile also allows then in the spring for whatever wildlife in there to emerge and start their cycle over as you slowly add them into your compost. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some spring cleanup. And then, like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to drop those at any time into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll go over those. So this is another one. I said the Leave the Leaves campaign that you saw is very big, especially when it comes to wildlife and insects. Lepidoptera is a large one. So the Xerces Society kind of has a lot of those graphics that you'll see should start be showing up here if you're on social media. But in the spring, you get a lot of social media posts about people, saying, wait to do your spring cleanup, wait for at least 7 consecutive days in the 50s or consistently in the 50s. So what's that all about? Well, you also have to think about, you've got the wildlife that's in your fallen leaves, and hopefully they stay there over winter, but they don't, as soon as March rolls around, most of them aren't just waking up. We get itchy because we've been in the house, we're tired of snow, we want to go out and see if our daffodils are starting to bloom. We really want to we get that spring fever of, I want to get out in my garden, especially if you're really into gardening. You want to start planting things. But if you do it too soon, you actually, again, if you were really careful all winter, you're still going to have those impacts to the wildlife that's in there. So I like this kind of these lists of things to think about. So when is really the right time to unleash that green thumb of yours? Well, a few things to consider. One is, have you put away all of your mittens and your winter coats and your snow shovel? More than likely, if you're here in central Indiana, probably not in March, maybe not in April, and we could get snow all the way into May. So kind of keeping that one in mind is, let's just wait until we know for sure that winter is finished. Have you paid your taxes? I'm not saying you need to pay your taxes, but that time frame is a good one to think about. Would you actually plant tomatoes? This is funny because I think a lot of people push and try to plant their tomatoes way too early, and it doesn't help their tomatoes at all. But you know, it's not good to plant your tomatoes outside until your evening temperatures are in the 50s. It does not help your tomatoes at all to try to get them out early. They'll just sit there and that cold weather will stunt them. And then if you get a late frost, then you have dead tomatoes. So you want to wait until it's warm enough to put in your tomatoes. So that's about the time that's good enough to start cleaning up your yard and not worrying that you're affecting the pollinators or the other wildlife that might be sleeping in your garden beds. Is it time to mow? Well, maybe it is. Depends on what type of grass you have. I like this other one is, are the apples finished blooming? So this is an easy one to see. So, you know, our apple trees here in central Indiana, somewhere between mid-April, mid-May. So once they're finished blooming, we know for sure pretty much everything has emerged. You know, even some before that, if you think like the mason bees and pollinating the apple trees. So again, you want to be consistently in the 50 degrees for at least a good week before you full out get out there and start just cleaning everything up. But even as you're cleaning up, there's a few things to think about. All right, so the right way when you're cleaning up your garden in the spring is really just, you know, one, be careful. Remember, there's a lot of beneficial insects in that leaf litter, and that includes the leftovers from your perennial plants. So if you have coneflower or, you know, goldenrods or really any of those perennials, and, you know, they lose their leaves over winter, just as you're cleaning up, just be careful, right? Because those leaves, just as much as the leaves from the trees, are going to hold a lot of different insects, either as eggs or as young, or maybe even some of those like chrysalises and cocoons. Another one to think about is if you're going to add mulch. Now, again, if you kept your leaves, you probably don't need any more mulch. But if you don't have enough leaves, wait to mulch. I know a lot of times they'll do specials really early in the spring, but try to hold off because a lot of insects will overwinter in those burrows. Remember, we talked about the bumblebee, she's just an inch or two below the soil. The hummingbird clearwing moth as a caterpillar is another one. A lot of those native bees, they are ground nesters or sleepers in the winter. So if you go and you cover them with a really thick layer of mulch early in the spring, it's going to make it challenging for them to emerge correctly, right? Now that where they were just an inch or two below the soil, now they're another 3 inches to try to get through. That's not soil anymore because you've mulched. So kind of just wait, let the soil dry out a little, let it warm up a little bit, and then apply your mulch. And the other one is if you're doing any spring cleanup that is involved pruning, just kind of take care when you're doing that and watching. So I love the little chrysalis that's in this picture, and it's on a branch that, you know, someone might be getting ready to trim that branch in the spring. You don't want to damage that chrysalis. So just kind of watch what you're trimming if you're doing any spring pruning, and keep a lookout for those cocoons and chrysali. Sorry. And this is another one to think about. And this is great for a lot of your native plants and a lot of different native insects, is keeping some of that old growth. So as you are cleaning up your old plants, the old plant stems, as the new growth starts to emerge, is keep some length to those because they provide nesting habitat all summer long for a lot of different insects. So things like your native bees, like your leaf cutters, your mason bees, your little syrphid flies, your lacewings, a lot of your parasitic wasps. These are all very important, really good beneficial insects to have in your yard. They'll help take care of those pests without any need for chemicals. But they use those hollow plant stems either as an adult to kind of just hang out or to put their young. A lot of the native bees do that one. So one is you want to be careful when you're cutting that you're not cutting and throwing them away, the same as the leaves. But when you do cut, try to leave a good anywhere from 6 inches to 18 inches of length left over on your old growth. It's okay. It might look a little ragged at the start, but think about by May, June, most of your new growth will be above and beyond those. It will actually help add a little support to those plants, things like Joe Pye or mountain mint that might kind of flop a little bit from their weight. That'll add a little extra protection or trellising. But at the same time, you're providing a lot of homes for those animals because those stems, they're pithy. And that allows the insects to actually hollow out those stems and use them for nesting. So think about the little, native bee like condos that you can buy with bamboo. You're actually creating your own condo and you don't have to purchase it. Something natural, it renews every year. And the insects are going to utilize that one just as much, or if not more, than something you might purchase in a store. So some hollow stem plants are like Joe Pye, elderberry is another one, your wild bergamot or your mints, your mountain mint, and even milkweed, like swamp milkweed. Again, trim them high and leave those cut old growth for the insects to use. If you do end up trimming your plants and it's still really early in the spring, you can still do it. And what you can do is actually then bundle those cut stems together and stick them somewhere in your yard. You can hang them with twine on the side of a fence or prop them against an area. And that's going to allow, if there's any insects in those stems, to actually emerge. And then by, end of May, early June, you can throw them away or make sure you take a peek because you might have had insects moving in the meantime and you've already made your own little bee condo that's going on. So again, kind of being patient, making sure that they can live their entire life cycle in your yard. So just a few thoughts, and then if anyone has any questions. So I kind of like this one, yeah, think about it with the leaves and the spring cleanup, especially if you're into native gardening or vegetable gardening or every of those things, you've given them all spring and summer and early fall. You gave them places with flowers. You gave them places to nest. You promoted them. You tended your garden. You worked really hard to make sure that you weren't applying pesticides and herbicides. But then again, out of sight, out of mind, we forget that those same little insects and animals that lived in your yard in the summer, they're still there. You just don't see them. So, don't take all that hard work you did all summer long and take it to the curb and then wonder in the spring, where did all my bees go that I had last year? And it takes them time to find their way back. Kind of keep that area. So let your garden stand all winter. If you can, don't do any sort of cleanup. Maybe get some of the leaves off your yard, put them in your flower beds instead. So you're providing habitat for all of those beneficial insects and those creatures so that they can make it through what is always a very hard season for them, with winter being. And then remembering that spring garden cleanup, it really shouldn't be a destructive thing. It should be very purposeful on what you're trying to do, keeping in mind all the different animals that might be there, and that most of that dead material is going to be very important nutrients for your plants as they grow in the summer. So, all right, so that is all I have. And if anyone knows what the cat or the butterfly is here, he kind of fits in with the last slide. So that is a question mark butterfly. But if anybody has any questions, like I said, if you want to drop them in the chat or the Q&A, and if not, thank you for tuning in. Like again, this will be uploaded to the Zionsville Parks and Rec YouTube channel. We'll also share it on social media. And if questions come to you later on, feel free to reach out to the department and to ask. But I'll wait around for a few minutes and we'll see. And if not, then I will turn this off. Terry, I know you raised your hand. Can you type that into the chat? Your question or comment that you might have? Oh, chat. Well, you found the Q&A. I don't know why it's showing up on mine. I'm not sure why it's working for you guys. All right. All right, so you asked how much of the leaf drop should I leave? Should I do the first bunches of leaves and then leave a thin covering? I'm assuming you're asking about for your yard versus anything. Okay, so for your yard, the key is you don't want to actually smother your grass. Turf is very particular, hence why we always spend so much on watering and weeding and fertilizing. It's a very high maintenance plant, or a crop, if you want to call it that, since we are really treating it as a crop. So you want to keep it so that it's really there, you can see grass between the leaves. So that picture that I had earlier that it was kind of sprinkled on, that would be perfectly fine. When you start to get in where it's a full cover or even thicker, then you're going to have that tendency that you might actually then suffocate the grass that's underneath. Grass has very short roots, and it really does not do well when things are laying on top of it. So like I said, if you have a few leaves that are here and there, they're fine to leave in there. They're actually good because then as they break down, they're going to provide nutrients to that grass. But try to keep, like I said, most of the lawn untouched. So that could be raking those leaves into your flower beds as a natural mulch. They look kind of iffy because, when leaves are falling, they're usually dry, but as they kind of overwinter with the snow and the rain that we get, they'll start to kind of, mat down a little bit. And then they'll be that solid brown color by spring. And they look very similar to like a mulch would be. It's a different way to think about stuff. And again, kind of keep that one in mind, depending on where you live. It's a great opportunity to have those discussions if you happen to be in an HOA on, what is good and not good. It's, a great way to talk with management, but I get that not all of them listen. But a lot of times your front yard is treated a little differently than what is on in your backyard. So in that case, if you are in an HOA, you can always look at doing leaf mulching in your back beds and kind of leave the front curb to those HOA standards, at least until more of that kind of becomes more commonplace. Same with native plantings. It's kind of like you got to pick your battles, and some of them it's just a lack of knowledge, and others is just that antiquated old school way of thinking of this is how it's always been done. But yes, as far as your grass, if you want to keep your grass, you're going to need to make sure most of those leaves are off of it, or you can always consider just having a little less grass. So if there's areas that constantly get covered, maybe that's an occasion to have a new flower bed. All right. Like I said, if you think of another question, please feel free to reach out to the Parks Department. We're more than happy to answer those or provide resources that might help you. As far as if you want to learn more about leaving the leaves, the Xerces Society is a great resource for a lot of different things when it comes to pollinators and to insects, anywhere from information about leaving leaves as well as information about different homes and habitats that you can provide to wildlife. But everyone, thank you for tuning in. And like I said, we'll hopefully see you at the next webinar.